Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, December 5th. This is day 60. According to the news, NBC, as of about 30 minutes ago, the United Nations has warned that this is an even more hellish scenario unfolding. Israel's military has pushed further into South Gaza. Specifically, the Israeli military has said that today, quote, has been the most intense day since the beginning of the ground operation, end quote. Troops have actually entered into Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city and the main city where many of the displaced people have relocated. The intense aerial and ground assault is fueling mounting concerns for civilians that are crowded into the area. Again, this is from NBC, many of whom fled bombardment and battles in the north at Israel's urging. Palestinians are now being warned to evacuate large areas of the south, but according to the UN Secretary General, there is nowhere left for them to go. There's no place safe and very little to survive on. Beyond Gaza, the United States is in talks with allies about establishing a naval task force to escort commercial trips through the Red Sea after there have been escalating attacks from Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. And now the numbers of displaced people in Gaza have risen to a reported 1.9 million people. Gaza health officials are saying that the death toll has surpassed 16,200 after weeks of Israeli attacks. The IDF estimates still that about 1,200 people were killed on October 7th in the Hamas attacks, and that there still remains 140 people held captive in Gaza. I wanted to spend the bulk of the update today giving some updates on Israeli society. There's some important changes happening. 3 or 4 days after the war is resumed since December 1st, this will affect the length of the war. And the question is, what's Israel's strategy? The Israeli Defense Forces have started their ground war into South Gaza, south of Wadi Gaza. They have not yet finished fighting Hamas on the ground in the north. Why are they moving south? Many of the holds Israeli government has put on normal activities since the war began are now being dropped because it's seeming that the war is going to continue for a long time. And I'm using war because that's what the world has identified it to be. But I would say the bombing of Gaza is going to continue. Most visibly, political parties in Israel have resumed debate on normal bills, which includes the budget in Israel. The Netanyahu corruption trial was supposed to resume. I've not heard updates on that specifically. Partisan political activity and the political infighting between Israeli parties in the coalition government has resumed, which is kind of a new thing that we've not seen since October 7th. It seems clear the government in Israel has been giving settlers and their supporters a free hand in the West Bank. This could have been to relieve pressure from the more mainstream right-wingers. And so there's a question about, is this going to still be allowed, or is Netanyahu going to shut down the free reign that the settlers have had in the West Bank? It seems like Israel has decided on a longer ground war. And so there is large concern and big concern that the bombing offensive and the ground offensive, which you heard me just report from NBC, as of 30 minutes ago, that this is the worst ground fighting that's happened since October 7th. Right in the areas where there are the largest amount of civilians and where the civilians who've been displaced have relocated to. And so that has significant concern. And why has Israel moved their ground forces south when in North Gaza, it says that the IDF has only engaged around 500 of the 800 tunnels that they found? And so that's a question that we're asking, for example. Most observers are expecting the Israeli Defense Forces to try to isolate and finish off Hamas's military capabilities in the north before extending to the south. And so those are some of the questions about why is this move to the south happening at this point. We know that there are already about 70 Israeli soldiers that have been killed in the ground invasion thus far. There's no indication about if the move south is a result of Israeli politics or if it's a result of Israeli Defense Forces military calculations. Or, we know the US had pressured fewer Palestinian civilian casualties, which then doesn't really make sense. There's some thought that a conventional ground assault moving a front line across Gaza would kill more civilians in a given day, but less in the long run. That was at least an analysis that we heard from a retired Foreign Service officer. This retired Foreign Service officer had shared with us that they thought that the ground war might even continue into 2024 or beyond. And so there's just a question about how long is this going to continue? How long is this going to go on? We do know that within Israeli society, there is a limited relaxation of wartime restrictions. And so, for example, Netanyahu has a corruption trial that was set to resume. Today is Tuesday, the 5th. It was set to resume yesterday, Monday, December 4th. Political parties have resumed their legislative functions. And there are some other relaxations of wartime restrictions that have started back up. And so we are paying attention to that within Israeli society. So it seems like those could be indications that the war could be going on for much, much longer. It's important to know that there are other aspects that have not been relaxed. For example, the war cabinet is continuing. Army reserves are still mobilized. Israel's economy is beginning to suffer as a result of these several weeks of war. It's unclear how long the economy in Israel can stand this level of mobilization. Israel's GDP seems to have dropped about 5+% for 2023 already since October 8th. We also know, and we've talked about this before, that there have been extra restrictions on pro-Palestinian political expression within Israel. And those continue. Although Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis haven't communally escalated, there have not been tensions within Arab Israeli citizens or Jewish Israeli citizens as there were previously in 2021 was when we saw Palestinian citizens of Israel who were actively involved in some of the resistance. And we have not seen that happen right now. We know that Hamas's attacks on October 7th also killed and abducted Arab Israelis, for example. And polls show us that Arab Israelis or Palestinian citizens of Israel are somewhat divided on whether or not they support Israel's government's aims of war in Gaza. And those who are opposed to the war in Gaza are currently keeping a low profile. We've also talked about in north of Israel that there are 100,000 Israelis who've been displaced because of the Hezbollah escalations on the north border. And so 100,000 Israelis are internally displaced persons. They have not been allowed to return home. Those IDPs, of course, have a very, very different experience than those who have been displaced in Gaza. But there's growing pressure within Israel for them to be allowed to return. And we see also that partisan activity is resuming, though Jewish Israelis still monolithically support the war on Gaza. It seems like there's a societal taboo on partisan infighting during the war, and that taboo seems to be receding some. But nonetheless, support for the war is still rock solid. We do know that families of hostages are demanding, the strongest effort is for the return of the hostages. And many of the families of hostages in Israel are strongly supporting the war effort. We do also know that there are calls by Israelis for Netanyahu to resign. We have talked about that previously. We have said before that Netanyahu is the least popular person in Israel, and President Biden has been one of the most popular. We know that Gantz and other polls outside the ruling coalition are showing that the war cabinet was and continues to be popular, but that Netanyahu's coalition partners are not so in favor of Gantz. We also, as I've mentioned before, understand that settlers have been really given free rein, and that there has been a lot of chaos in the West Bank, which has resulted in the deaths of dozens and dozens of Palestinians. And I gave those statistics in past days. So there's a lot of pressure. There are a lot of dynamics within Israeli society. Some of the question is, where are those valves going to open? Where are they going to close? Is there going to be more pressure put against the settlement movement? We do know that President Biden has been opposed to settler and Israeli Defense Forces attacks in the West Bank. That has been one place where the Biden administration has been talking about putting pressure. And that has been because the Biden administration supports the establishment of a Palestinian state, and that is not getting resonance among Israelis. And honestly, not many Americans are resonating with that or supporting that either. And with so much of Biden's positions and the attention being so much on Gaza, the West Bank in large part is being ignored. So our call continues to be a call for a ceasefire, a call for the release of hostages, a call for immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance. With the ground incursion now entering into South Gaza, a call for a bilateral ceasefire is more important now than ever before. So if you have not gone onto our website, if you are not familiar with our Advent prayer chains, you can find a phone number. We have a system on our website where you go and you click a button. It will call all 3 of your members of Congress. You then push the star button. We have, you go to your community calls with Congress. It'll give you what language to say, calling for a ceasefire, calling for an end to violence. And we invite you to please, please, please join us in that call. An end to violence, a negotiated settlement, addressing the core causes. These are the things that are going to bring peace for Gaza, peace for the occupied Palestinian territories, an end to the occupation, and peace for Israel.